Today, we will be discussing natural heritage from the Caribbean perspective as we continue our discussions on heritage tourism management and preservation in the Caribbean. I am Dr. Allison Ramsay. At the end of the session, you should be able to do several things: define natural heritage, outline examples of natural heritage, explain the importance of natural heritage, and outline UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the Caribbean, specifically natural sites. At this time, we want to take a look at this video and think of how we can relate heritage tourism to natural heritage and phenomenon that takes place within the world of natural heritage. Now, we may or may not be familiar with this recent incident at what is called Devil's Wood Yard. And I want you to think of how this natural phenomenon can affect heritage tourism. So what you're seeing here is footage from this, what is called volcano. And its first recorded eruption was in 1852 and again about 20 years ago. And it is usually dormant with some emissions of mud and gas over the years. And in 1993, it opened up as a touristic site and has recreational facilities to facilitate this. So how can this help us to think about heritage tourism and natural occurrences affecting such? As we see, this shot shows the width and breadth of the eruption. I'm sure that this would have generated a lot of thoughts about natural heritage and natural heritage tourism. So let's think about what is natural heritage. Now, natural heritage refers to elements of biodiversity. And biodiversity includes flora and fauna, plants and animals, ecosystems, and geological structures. Now, biodiversity means diversity among living things. And the ecosystems refer to a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. A biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. Now, the structures that we're talking about can include faults and folds in the architecture of the Earth's crust. And these geological structures influence the shape of the landscape. So we can see with the volcano, these elements of faults and folds and so forth, and the Earth's crust and so forth. So these are the major tenets of natural heritage. We want to think about why natural heritage is important, and we want to protect green spaces. We want to preserve our wetlands. We want to preserve biodiversity. And this is important because we need to use species for food, for medicine, for raw materials. All of these things we need to have in our natural environment. And we also need to conserve our forests. We need to protect our green spaces for several reasons, and these include providing a habitat for wildlife and birds, and to prevent flooding and erosion, for example. All of these things are important in preserving our green spaces. Prevention of flooding, providing habitat for wildlife and birds. For wetlands, it also helps to prevent flooding and erosion. And our wetlands are important in terms of our oceans, our lakes, and our rivers as a source of drinking water as well. Our wetlands also become important for heritage tourism, specifically ecotourism, which we will discuss later on in the course. For the forest, we need the forest to filter air, noise, and dust pollution, and to provide important wildlife and bird habitats. So we need to have a habitat for our animals and our birds, and we need to reduce pollution, and this is why this is important. Now, in terms of provision of food and provision of remedies, we understand that herbal remedies and medicinal plant use in the Caribbean is very important to us. So we need our natural heritage, our plants to help us continue this. And these are traditions that are passed on through generations. And they become part of our heritage and our relationship with the environment. Now, in your own backyards, you may have different herbs growing, different bushes growing, different plants growing, and you may not even know what they mean, or you may. So some of the typical ones we can think of are aloe, mauby-bark, and cerasee. And they're used for many different purposes. And we also use them, for example, in terms of the cerasee to relieve constipation, colds, and fevers in children. We use mauby-bark to lower blood pressure for arthritis. We use aloe for cosmetic and skincare purposes and for cleansing purposes. And I'm sure that you would have also probably used some of these herbal remedies yourself. Now, we also see that our plants are a source of food and contribute to a diet of starchy crops like cocoa and fruits in the Caribbean. And some of the typical starchy, or what we call provision, or ground provisions in the Caribbean, include sweet potato and yam and so forth. And we make several dishes from these. So at the top you see an example of cassava pone, and at the bottom you see an example of an aloe plant that we typically use in our day-to-day life. So you can think of what is in your backyard, and if you're not sure, you can go home and ask your parents or your grandparents what are some of the typical medicinal plants and herbal remedies that they use or they knew of as children. And you can share that with us next week. Now, in terms of UNESCO World Heritage natural sites, we would already discuss in our previous class what is UNESCO World Heritage and what are their sites. So we're focusing today on the natural sites of UNESCO World Heritage, and the World Heritage list that we are focusing on comprises of over 1,000 properties of outstanding universal value. And of them, natural sites are 23% of this list, and then we have as well 35 mixed, meaning both cultural and natural sites, and 206 natural sites. So today we are focusing on those of the Caribbean because we would have already gone through in our previous class that information about general UNESCO World Heritage sites. So let's look at two of them here. So we have two photos here. At the top we have Jamaica's Blue and John Crow Mountains. Now this was designated in 2015 as a mixed and natural site. And this is the latest site in the Caribbean to gain UNESCO World Heritage status. And this is very important for Jamaica because these mountains tell the story of maroon survival. And the maroon survival is very important because they use these mountains as places of home, places to launch their wars against British colonizers. They also have spiritual connections with the mountains, and they have an intangible cultural legacy, example, traditional medicine and dances and religious rites. And these mountains also are important from a biodiversity standpoint because they have many endemic plant species, mosses, flowering plants, etc. that exist within these mountains. Below that, we have the Belize Barrier Reef. And this reef is very important in the reef structure of Belize, and it also is a home for many threatened species, including manatees, turtles, and crocodiles. We go to the other picture where we have three photos. We have at the top Dominica, the Pitons National Park. Underneath that, we have the St. Lucia Pitons Management Area, and the third photo refers to the Central Suriname Nature Reserve. And all of these are lush vegetation, and we see for Dominica, it contains volcanoes and lakes. In St. Lucia, it even includes plant species, coral reefs, and you have the two pitons, the Grand and Gros Piton. And for Suriname, we see an example of a waterfall and many animal species being in existence there, such as jaguars, otters, and eagles. Now, I want to make the point that not all natural heritage sites are World Heritage Sites. Everybody is not designated under World Heritage status. For example, we have the Cutl Falls in Guyana. Guyana has its Amazon, but it's not a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but a very important part of our natural heritage in the Caribbean. In Trinidad and Tobago, we also have natural heritage, but they are not UNESCO World Heritage Sites, but they are part of the natural heritage of the particular Twin Island Republic. So, for example, on our left, we have the Tobago Main Ridge Forest Reserve, and then on our right, we have the Pitch Lake as part of the natural habitat and so forth of Trinidad and Tobago. And this forest, for example, the Main Ridge Forest, is a habitat to many species, poisonous snakes, 210 species of birds, and so forth. Very important for the environment. So today I want you to look at the photographs and video clips that you would have seen, and I want you to write down responses to the following questions. Simply identify 2 places in the Caribbean where there are UNESCO World Heritage Sites and the names of those sites. And I want you to think ahead for next week's lesson. I want you to identify 2 challenges you think would occur in preserving natural heritage in the Caribbean. So we are actually going to begin our lesson next week on challenges that you would have identified yourself that you will share with the class in preserving natural heritage and its connection to heritage tourism in the Caribbean. We have underneath our next week's reading on natural history of Trinidad and Tobago from the text Caribbean Heritage as well. So in a nutshell, what we just want to recap is that natural heritage refers to flora, fauna, ecosystems, geological structures. All natural heritage sites do not have a UNESCO World Heritage status, but are part of our natural heritage. And we outlined that there are 5 UNESCO World Heritage sites in the Caribbean that we would have discussed. And we also want to note that natural heritage is very important for several reasons: protecting green spaces, preserving wetlands and biodiversity, and conserving our forests. Thank you.